Hi, folks. Welcome to Research Talk's Qualitative Scholar Conversations. I am Dr. Tony Adams, and I'm here with my colleagues Paul Mihas, Ray Maietta, Jeff Petruzzelli, and Dr. Carolyn Ellis. And we are here today to talk with you about the power and practice of autoethnography, storytelling that deepens knowledge and soothes the soul, a workshop that Carolyn and I are running on August 2nd, 2024.
And that course is part of ResearchTalk and Odum Institute's Qualitative Research Summer Intensive, which features over 2 weeks, 8 days of courses. And those courses are offered in 2-day and 1-day format. So if you go to researchtalk.com, you can learn more about the full range of offerings. And we're happy today, always happy, the three of us, to be joined by Carolyn and Tony. And we're happy to focus on one of the most powerful courses that you can take, whether you're beginning your career as a qualitative researcher or deeply steeped and experienced in qualitative. And my colleague, Paul Mihas, who is at the Odum Institute, will start us off today. Thank you, Paul.
Great, thanks, Ray. So Carolyn and Tony, I'd like to start by just asking you to tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you see yourselves as qualitative researchers, and feel free to talk about your evolution as qualitative researchers.
Okay, I will start. I'm Carolyn Ellis, and I'm currently retired and living in Safety Harbor, Florida, part of the year, and Franklin, North Carolina, the other part of the year. I have been an ethnographer from probably about the first day of my life when I opened my eyes. And I went to William and Mary and got a degree in sociology, doing an ethnographic study of isolated fishing communities. And then I went to Stony Brook for my PhD in sociology and continued doing that ethnographic work, which finally came out as Fisher Folk. So then my first job was at University of South Florida, and I, at that point, started to do autoethnography, and it came from personal experiences that I had in my life of losing my brother in an airplane crash when he came to visit me, and also having a partner who was chronically ill. And I started writing about my experiences, and I found not only was it therapeutic to do so, but it was, I thought I was writing the best sociology I'd ever written, even though it didn't look like the sociology I had been trained to write. And so that really started my work in autoethnography. And I have spent the time since about the mid 80s, really 1980s, writing autoethnography, writing about autoethnography, methodological text. Tony and I have written a number of things together, including a book on autoethnography, running conferences, going to conferences, having graduate students who were doing autoethnography. And that really has been my emphasis for some time. In the middle of all that, I did start interviewing Holocaust survivors, and that was quite a project, and almost like a circle return to ethnography of the other. More, of course, autoethnography is about the other as well, but this was more directly about the other. And with that project, I tried to bring what I think of as an autoethnographic perspective to doing compassionate interviewing with other people, which is interviewing that where you care more about the other person and their well-being than you do about gathering data. And you try to work with them and share authority as well as storytelling and develop a relationship, because to me, people tell stories very different in relationships than they do when they're talking to a stranger. And now I have moved kind of back into writing autoethnography, and I'm working on several pieces about conversations that I had with my dying sister in the last year. So that kind of brings you up to date, I think.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carolyn. So I, much of my early life, I was trained as a musician and I played piano and trumpet for many years, and I had a terrible teacher in high school, my senior year of high school, who said I could not do that professionally. And so I quit playing music. I mention this now because I came to writing, and writing is my music. And so when I sit at the keyboard, I'm playing my piano again. And so my early life informs very much of my present life, and a lot of the work that I do, especially the creative impulses that I take into my work. I pursued my undergraduate education at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, where I majored in news writing and reporting. And this was a world that required me to go out and interview others and take that information back and write stories and air the stories for other folks writing at a 5th grade reading level. If it bleeds, it leads. I learned all of these tricks with writing. I learned that I hated news reporting because it was really depersonal, impersonal, and I did not like reporting, especially on tragedies, when I was finding myself collecting data about tragedies, and then I felt like I was benefiting from being able to tell good stories about other people's tragedies, and I didn't have any investment in that work. And so I thought I was going to leave that world, but then I get into graduate school, also at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, where I learned many of the early research techniques involves dealing with, working with folks and their data, and asking ourselves, how do we want to work with others' information, and what do we owe them, and how do we want to represent them. I knew some lessons from news reporting of stuff I didn't want to do, and some stuff that I really wanted to do. And so at Carbondale, I took had my first class in my first formal class in autoethnography with Ron Pelias 20 years ago, spring 2004. And in that class, we read Carolyn's then very new book, The Ethnographic Eye. So that was my introduction to Carolyn Ellis. And then that next fall, I started my PhD program at the University of South Florida, where I continued working on narrative and autoethnographic projects. My first class at University of South Florida was with Art Bachner in narrative inquiry, a very formative class that also continued this training in autoethnography. And then I took my second formal autoethnography class with the Carolyn Ellis at University of South Florida, spring 2007. So I also had another methods class with Carolyn in May 2006. So a lot of training in methods. One thing that I learned, I love going back to my graduate transcripts, and I believe I had 12 to 14 designated qualitative methods courses. And it's fun to look at those things. And so I often say that I am a qualitative methodologist. I have those lots of training in qualitative methods. But the thing that I loved most, and this is the calling of autoethnography, is that there's always a personal component to all of my projects. And I recognized that personal experiences matter. They are insightful. We learn about the world. We relate to others through the experiences that we have. They inform how we do our research. We in qualitative research are the research instrument, and autoethnography allows me to interrogate the ways that I am the research instrument. My feelings and emotions come to the process. I also can reflect on methodological dilemmas. My positionality can inform the work I do. Very important to acknowledge. The thing that drives a lot of my autoethnography has really been to figure out instances where my experiences I've rubbed up against cultural issues that have complicated how I live. The most prominent one that I write about a lot is the moment in 2001 when I started to come out as queer. And it was a moment where the very active disclosure alienated me from my biological family, a system of support that I once thought was unconditional that proved to be quite conditional. And so for 20 some years, that has been a priority of doing my work to figure out what's going on. Why is there been such backlash to disclosures of sexuality? And even more importantly, this work has allowed me to survive and definitely thrive. And it has saved my life. And so I'm here today in 2024, living the autoethnographic life that has also sustained me and nourished me and saved me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to both of you. Tony, you just mentioned had a sentence, we are the research instrument. And I was just wondering, we have a couple of topics that we've discussed before that we'll chat about now, but either one of you can take this. Is for folks brand new to autoethnography who may have just heard the term and don't really know much more about it, how would you concisely orient them to autoethnography? And I'm purposely avoiding the word definition if you think that applies, but there's something much more fluid about the process that it feels like. To me, it feels like using definition bounds it too tightly in a way we don't want to. But yeah, it may be both of you, but just first, if you can just kind of orient people who are new to the idea of autoethnography concisely, and then we'll get into the topics that we addressed before we began today.
Well, without going straight to a definition, I still want to, look at the word and the parts of the word, which are auto, self, ethno, other, culture, and graphy, which means writing a representation of the relationship between self and other. And autoethnography really emphasizes, bringing yourself into what it is that you're studying. So you're not just this try to be a neutral observer looking at the other. You still look at the other, hopefully in very intense, deep ways, but you also look at yourself and use your own experiences, your own emotions, your own thoughts, your own motivations to help you understand what is going on here. Because I think that's what social scientists are in the habit of doing, is to try to figure out what's going on here. I don't know how you figure out what's going on here without also using your own experience of whatever it is that you happen to be looking at. So it's all of that. And I think it opens up all kinds of things that can be studied that we can't study any other way, and that it then adds to the kind of knowledge that we have from the other ways of doing social science and humanistic research. It really is, to me, a perspective that tries to combine humanities and social science. And so I often think of it as using, what we know about ethnographic methods, but then trying to express it in a form that is more literary, more story-like, or it can be a performance or art or whatever, but often we think in terms of stories. And so it kind of gets in those cracks and gets to things that we might not get if we center ourselves concretely in one perspective or the other. So it's really a messy cross-genre kind of orientation. And not only does it help us with understanding human experience, but it can be, therapeutic. It can be helpful to us to explore our experience in those kinds of deep ways, and to explore our relationships with other people, our interactions with other people in those deep ways as well. I mean, that's what ethnography is looking at the relationship between self and other, but often we've moved the self back and only looked at the other. So here we're now looking at the two together. So in so many ways, I think autoethnography is good for everybody. Whether you are an academic who wants to do autoethnographic studies, or whether you're a person who just wants to understand your experience better, or want to try to work yourself to being a different person, to a different goal. It certainly has occupied both positions in my life. I mean, I used it to try to understand various experiences I had been through, such as the death of my brother in an airplane crash, or this relationship that I had with someone who was critically ill and dying. The piece about my brother is entitled "There Are Survivors," because I think that autoethnography can help you be a survivor. And I used to tell my undergraduate autoethnography students that, this is a class where you learn to do your own therapy. And I'm not hesitant about putting therapy and research in the same sentence, even though when I was a graduate student, I was told you don't do that, but I do that now, because I'm hoping that all research could be therapeutic for the people who are doing it, the people you're doing it with, and the people who read it. So I no longer do anything that I think doesn't have the potential to be therapeutic.
It sounds like also, rather than avoiding the subjective, which many people tell us we should do, that you all are empowering subjectivity.
Exactly.
And what we know. It's beautiful. Tony, I'm sure there's lots. Carolyn said that I saw you affirming a lot, she said, but I think anything in your voice you want to add?
Yeah, I had come to the ethnography are there, self's there, culture's there. The graphy as a qualitative, as somebody who adores qualitative research, something even in the last few years that I've come to embrace and share is that autoethnography, the graphy of ethnography and the graphy of autoethnography is very special and deliberate. And we don't do survey graphy research. We don't do phenomenology graphy. We don't do experiment graphy. We don't do interview graphy. Graphy is a core component of this method, and this gets us into those stories, the evocative stories and the compelling tales. And that is really important for this work. I was smiling. Autoethnography is good for everybody. I often say that autoethnography is, if you're trained in autoethnography, you are not only going to be a much better researcher, you're going to be a much more ethical researcher. And this is where Carolyn's work comes in, that you at the very least, autoethnography, even if you might not do it formally in any kind of formal way and thinking of publication, it's going to at least make you consider your personal connections to a project, your personal investments in a project, the decisions that you made, even down to, are you going to interview people for 5 minutes or 30 minutes or 2 hours or 6 days a week? And these all come with pros and cons, but you're being trained in the ethics of you're recognizing the decisions you're making during the research act. And the final thing I want to say related to this is that acknowledging our personal experience in the research and being able to identify our positionality, being able to articulate for readers the choices that we make when doing a project, I would argue that kind of transparency and genuine honesty adds to our credibility, allows people to access our work and believe us, and care about our project. And what are we doing this stuff if we don't care, or folks don't care? I think inherently in this method and in this orientation, this way of life, autoethnography allows us to bring in the personal and to recognize how the personal matters.
Beautiful. Paul and Jeff, anything that you want to follow on as we continue?
Well, Carolyn, I'm thinking about a sentence that was in the Ethnographic Eye, where you talked about writing when the world seems to be falling apart, or when how you see the world seems to be like what you thought the world was or is falling apart. And I'm really struck by that sort of entry point into writing when things are kind of destabilizing in front of our eyes.
Yes. Yes, I certainly, when I look back at everything I've written, a lot of it has occurred during very unstable times, whether they were not stable for me personally or whether they were not stable for the world in general, or both. I mean, I'm thinking about my 9/11 piece that I wrote when the towers were hit and we were in total chaos. And at the same time, my mother was in a nursing home and trying to get home, and I was trying to get to her. I was on a plane trying to get to her. And my personal world was falling apart, and my contextual world was falling apart. And I realized that normally, when one of them is falling apart, you rely on the other, and I didn't have anything to rely on. It was like chaos everywhere that I looked. And I spent a long time, I stopped everything I was doing at that point and spent a long time trying to write about that chaos and how the personal and the cultural fit together in my experience of 9/11. And I found that I find these writings just, so helpful to me personally, because I come to understand myself better, but I also come to understand the world that I live in better. And then what happens is this opens up conversations with other people, and through their storytelling and response, whether to me or to other people, it just keeps going and deepens, the understanding and the sense of connection, because that's really what autoethnography is about. It's about connecting with others around you. So yes, I highly recommend this kind of writing, and it isn't when you are in a period of turmoil or chaos, and it isn't just a matter of sitting down and writing your story, but the working through of your story with draft after draft after draft, to me, is where the potential therapeutic elements exist, because you get a sense of who you are, who you want to be, and how do you get there. And for many of us, it's how do we survive this? How do we survive what the world has given us to cope with?
So when we come to the course and the title, which we worked very carefully to kind of craft that to your expertise and the ways that folks could benefit from your experiences, your knowledge, collected, the two of you, the power and practice of autoethnography, storytelling that deepens knowledge and soothes the soul. Very intentional words in presentation. And we wanted to hear the two of you tell us more about the course origins and how it was built, why this course. We'll give you broad latitude in what you bring in. And the two of you have already introduced us to the richness of what you've contributed to the literature through articles, through your own writing, through your teaching in your jobs, through your teaching in professional development at conferences, all those kinds of things. So yeah, if you could bring us more depth to everything that kind of went into kind of building this particular course and the intentionality of what we see in the title.
Tony, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think this, this for us, we haven't had the we've written this has been our first workshop we've ever done together. We did this last year, and it was magical. We have written a lot together, and we've done a lot of work together for many years, almost 20 years now. So this has been a great opportunity to come together and talk through how we do autoethnography and what it means for us, but more importantly, how others can use it and how they can use it to their benefit and what it might mean for them. In terms of this course, we were throwing around a lot of really important terms to think about what we wanted to accomplish with this. To get into sense making in our everyday lives, navigating that chaos, feeling, Carolyn's talking about, when the world's falling apart. I turned to autoethnography as a reader to feel less alone, to learn how to survive. So many autoethnographies and so many authors, especially Carolyn, that I go to, and I feel comforted by their words. And we do this work, to make sense of our lives, but we also do this to help others feel less alone. We do this work to heal. We do this for therapy. We do this to make sense of chaos. We do this. I come to this. For me, survival. I come to this through survival. But survival is not. I mean, it sounds negative, but I also want to survive. I want to keep going, and I think that that's an important part of doing this work, is figuring out harmful practices, harmful ideas, moments of tension, disconnect that I'm tangled by in everyday discourse from others. And I can show that. I'm the research instrument. I can show you scenes and interactions that would be really hard to capture through other methods. I value the epistemic, the generative power of personal experience, and what it can teach us, and how we can work that into our projects.
And to ditto almost everything that Tony just said, we have been working together for almost 20 years, and it's been an amazing relationship, a partnership, a love relationship, a maternal son relationship, colleague relationship. It's just really, there's so many elements to it. And we have had great success in writing together. There's just nobody in the world I would rather write with than Tony. He's the best first draft writer I know, which I always have trouble with. But just working back and forth, he always does everything he says he's going to do when he says he's going to do it. And that's really hard to find in the world. So I really appreciate that. And then we've done, a book and several books, and we've done a lot of papers together, and we've organized together. I mean, I so enjoy being part of IANI, the Autoethnography and Narrative Inquiry group that we put together. It really feels like my home, and Tony is the main person that makes that all work. But I love having ideas with him about how to do conferences in different ways, and it's just been amazing. And so, as Tony said, we had never done a workshop together, which is surprising. And so when Ray offered us this opportunity, we jumped on it and said, "Oh, wouldn't that be fun?" And it was fun last year, and I know that it will be fun this year as well. And so it's a different way of relating and coming to understand even more about each other and how we work together in our relationship, as well as bringing it to people who might not have much exposure to autoethnography. And I think the workshop and research talk is fantastic for all those folks out there in the world who maybe they have a mentor who believes in autoethnography, maybe they don't, maybe they can put a committee together, maybe they can't. But to come to this workshop, I think really helps move them along, gets them connected with other people who have complementary interests to theirs. And so I think it's just a very important project, and I'm really glad to be a part of it. And thanks, Ray, and the rest of you for organizing this and making it happen.
It was so interesting to me when I heard that the two of you hadn't co-taught, and you've both been such a vital part of the summer intensive. And Carolyn, you were there the first time we offered it. Jeff, I don't remember, was that 2002 or so? I know we took a year off, but and I remember Carolyn, Jeff, and I both students in your class. And I remember writing an essay then about the start of my vision loss, which I thought was kind of cured by a contact I lost in my car on the way to class. I don't know if you remember that story.
I remember that.
Yeah, and then it turned out that it's continued to the now eventually I'll lose sight in the eye. But in terms of the perspective formation for myself, I just want to validate what the two of you said. I mean, and I don't have nearly the experience, but just I followed up with the essay in your course with some of the personal things about that. And over the years, I've continued. And it really does serve that purpose, this soothes the soul piece. And one of the things in listening to you, Carolyn and then Tony, you followed with lots of helpful information for anyone, not just to learn, but to do autoethnography. Jeff and Paul and I get a question from folks oftentimes when they see on our agenda an autoethnography course. Tony, you've also taught a course titled Learning from Subjectivity. And many times people will say to us, I'll never do that in my own life. I'll never, do that research and those kinds of things. You've given us a lot already in response to this, but how do you see folks benefiting from your course if they don't anticipate it being a part of their professional career? And part of it is you've already established, hey, it's good for your personal life too. But yeah, let me just let whoever wants to pick up, tell us a little bit more about, hey, here's ways this course will enhance who you are as both a scholar and a person if you take it, even if you don't anticipate doing it deeply.
Well, we talk about autoethnography being a way of life, not just a method or content or story, but a way of life. And I think it really is. I mean, we have an autoethnographic community, and I think the community really demonstrates the autoethnographic lifestyle, where people seem to care about each other, take care of each other, take care of themselves, are, as Tony said earlier, very involved in doing ethical research that will benefit people as opposed to just collecting information. And I think that, all of that is important, and no matter what kind of research you're doing, to just think about those principles and ways of being and doing research. And if you're not going to, be an academic, but I think it's still really helpful as, when we answered Paul's question and how it helped get us through crises. It helps Tony survive, find companionship. And I think, to instructing people that it's okay to write about your life, and it's okay to think about yourself in those ways, those deep ways, and try to come to some understanding. And that, the world is a complex, chaotic place, and life is full of problems that have to be coped with. And I think, as I said earlier, that autoethnography is a way of teaching people that there are a lot of things you can cope with yourself. I'm not saying don't go to therapy. If you need to go to therapy, do it. But there are a lot of ways in which you can be your own therapist through this kind of personal writing. And so we're hoping that no matter who takes our course, that they can get something out of this that's helpful in their lives. And if they are, practicing folks, therapists or whatever, or even, in a small business or whatever, I think this kind of orientation of almost seeing the world as a story, seeing yourself in part of a story, makes us more empathic to other people around us. So we're not just like examining ourselves, but we are trying to, and we very much take the role of the other and try to figure out how would they tell the story. And then, how might that improve the relationship when you start to look at from other perspectives and not just your own. And particularly in this world where we are so polarized, we need a lot of taking the role of the other. So if we can add to that in any way, it will make me feel like I'm contributing.
Beautiful. Tony, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, the folks who aren't familiar with autoethnography, who come to this or might not ever be able to do this, at the very least, I go back to that. We're not, if you come to this course, we're not going to force you to do autoethnography in your life. We're going to talk about the ways you can do this, and it'll be up to you. The way, and you will find ways that it connects with you and your work. Again, I want to emphasize that autoethnography, knowing autoethnography improves research practice, all research practice. I cannot stress that enough. Figuring out how to deal with the personal is going to help you figure out, gosh, I wouldn't want this to be said about me. Well, maybe that's a lesson where you check yourself that you might not say that about others. And so that's what I mean about improving research practice when we work with other people, when we craft our representations. I think that this is for me, and especially how we've worked through this course, it's a push, motivation to encourage folks, especially in. I consider autoethnography a way of life. I'm living this day every day, day in, day out. I'm living that autoethnographic life. But for folks who have what some might call a work-life balance, this is a course that I don't believe I'm living life as it going. But for those folks, I think this course will push them to figure out what they consider to be meaningful. What do they want to do? What is their stake in the work that they do? This semester, I'm doing a few projects around campus. And the one question that I often ask anybody when they're telling me about any of their work, I often say, why are you doing this? Why do you care? And guess what? There's often a story. Maybe I'm working in the Title IX office because I have 20 years of being harassed on campus. I'm doing somebody else is doing work on diversity, equity, inclusion. And you ask them why, and they say, because I live a life of walking through microaggressions every single day. And maybe I can't write about those microaggressions, but that's why I'm doing this work. This is what autoethnography does. It's this push to how are you living? Why are you doing this work that matters? And I would imagine any folks who sign up for workshops at QRSI are at least thinking about doing some kind of research project. And I would argue that this course is going to tap into that personal side and say, what are those motivations that you see yourself? Why are you here? What questions are you asking? And how have they stemmed from your experiences? Because I think often they do.
And with that, there's, to me, in so much of, I've talked specifically about the two of your work, there's such a soundness of story. There is a completeness. We oftentimes, Jeff and I, we've talked about this in another interview, we ask folks who we're working with, how does the data give you permission to make your claim? And it's just so clear. And Carolyn, earlier, when you were talking about autoethnography and how it gives access to information you can't otherwise find. And that's really the key way to justify your approach, is there is such detail and nuance that informs in autoethnographic work. And both of you have contributed to things that have helped me and my family. I remember when we were caring for my mom, Carolyn, Ellis, your work about your essay and working and caring for your mom. My sister read, and
Wow.
I don't know if I ever thanked you for that. And Tony, I've talked to you about family members and issues of your gender identity work. And we bridge also for people who do this work, not just in terms of learning how to tell a complete, effective, attractive story, but also the bridges between the academic takeaways and the personal takeaways. And there's so much, I think you said earlier, Carolyn, about not running away from, I forget what it was, but when I think of you and knowing you as long as I have, you don't run away from anything. You're like, go to the bravest, you're like a hero. And I think that's another piece of this, is we oftentimes think we run away from a potential bridge between the academic intellectual statement and contribution and the personal. Is like, no, they live together and they dance quite comfortably together. And it's such a compliment to see how you both do that as artists. It's wonderful. We could keep going. We want to bring things to a close here. We have admins at the Summer Intensive who monitor courses. We always have gentle arguments on our team about who gets to sit with Tony and Carolyn. We'll do that again this year, but I wanted to check with my colleagues before we finish up and see, Jeff, Paul, if there's anything that you wanted to ask Tony and or Carolyn before we wrap, and thank them, of course, for this wonderful time.
I was just thinking about, and I guess this is more of a comment, I don't know if it's really a question, but I was just thinking about the ways when you talk about autoethnography being therapeutic. As qualitative researchers, we often do this work that's so intense and very heavy, and oftentimes it's very personal to us. We often study things that affect our lives in one way or another. That's why we're doing this work. And it seems that there's usually not an outlet to kind of to help yourself. So you're doing this work and you're presenting it out, and oftentimes it does have a deep impact on you. If you're studying, for example, we did a project with older people living with AIDS, and I have no experience with that topic, but just reading these people's stories and hearing their voices, it's intense, and it hurts, and there's often not an outlet to deal with those types of things. And what I'm hearing is that by kind of adding this personal element to the research process, you're able to kind of cope with some of those issues that come up as you're doing this really intense work.
Paul?
I just wanted to kind of follow up on, Tony, what you were saying about the question, why are you here? I love that. When you're like walking around campus or wherever you might be. And I think the autoethnography is really writing towards clarity. And I think that we all need that. And without that kind of clarity, I think we so just lose our way as researchers and as human beings. So I kind of go back to that idea. And we have water behind us, right? And I think of water as being this, source of clarity and being able to see. So I wanted to just add that here at the end.
Great. And I'm going to invite you to close us out. Tony, Carolyn, anything you want to say in words of wisdom as we, of course, thank you and honor you in all you do. But yeah, so anything you would say as we finish up for today?
Well, this has been delightful. I've loved the last 45 minutes, and I think we've gotten to some really important aspects of autoethnography, and I think you can see our love and passion for the topic, and also our appreciation to all of you for giving us the space to be able to talk about autoethnography and to people that we might not reach otherwise. And so thank you very much.
Wonderful, great. All right, so we are going to close out the official conversation, and if you can all hang out a couple of minutes after that. Thank you very much, and we can't wait. August 2nd, we'll be here before we know it. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.